No, so sorry.
All right.
Just with Heather. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay, right. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. I'm very honoured, and I'm also very humbled. I'm going to be talking about working with neurodivergent victims of sexual violence. So the current projects that I'm engaged in at the moment are around training specialist services, training police, so that was a national project, and establishing a new project for survivors called Lotus Collaborations. So in terms of training specialist services, it's really important that we address the following areas. So in terms of neurodivergent victims, specialist services and barriers to us are really key areas to address, because many neurodivergent people cannot access specialist services, and we're going to look at why. So we need to be looking at the social relational model of disability and the fact that neurodivergent victims need support processing and communicating sensory experiences. And also that neurodivergent victims need support identifying and describing emotions. And this is something that we call alexithymia. I'm not so bothered about people remembering big words, but I think it's really important that people do engage with actually what those words mean. So in terms of the social relational model of disability, when we look at what that means, it's really, really important to be focusing on something like this as opposed to the medical model, because the medical model looks at what is wrong with the person. It blames the person. But the social relational model of disability addresses inclusion and oppression. It understands and embraces neurodiversity and neurodivergence. It identifies difficulties and differences in a way that empowers individuals. It's about meaningful engagement with individuals to encourage neurodivergent voices. And perhaps more importantly as well, as a result, is that survivors are able to voice their experiences and needs. And it's about accessible and inclusive settings and resources. Sorry, I've just laughed there. I need to let my cat out. He doesn't like me speaking online. He's a bit shy. Sorry about that. So when we look at understanding sensory profiles, sensory environments are really, really important because there's a huge amount of evidence that shows that neurodivergent people, we process sensory experiences differently to the predominant neurotype. And if you think of that, for example, when we're looking for support and things, we need people who understand that we're processing our autistic experiences or our neurodivergent experiences, in addition to our experiences of trauma. And where those two experiences dovetail, that means we've got double the amount of sensory experiences to deal with. So they need to be unpicked, and they need to be unpicked by somebody who understands that. But everybody has a sensory profile, and this fluctuates. So you need to become familiar with environmental impacts. And I would always say, start working around yourself. You be comfortable and familiar with the environmental impacts that you like, that you enjoy, and also notice the ones that you don't. And think about whether you're hypersensitive or very sensitive to certain environments, or hyposensitive, so not very sensitive, or both. Now, in the context of sexual violence, hypersensitive means that you get a very big response to certain things, but hyposensitive can be very, very worrying, because if you've got someone who's presented to police with a lot of bruises, a lot of cuts and all, things like that, and they say that they can't experience, they can't feel anything, Now, that might be around trauma and shock, but it also might be that they're hyposensitive and they can't feel those things. And so whoever is working with them or supporting them needs to be aware of that. So when we look at sensory pleasures and sensory nightmares, again, everybody is unique. Every victim who walks through your door to be supported is unique. So you need to be creative in resolving those issues. What is the sort of thing that somebody wants in order to be able to function properly? And then we're looking at a big word, synesthesia. You don't necessarily need to remember the word, but just remember what it is. And it's about the merging of senses that are not normally connected. So many autistic people do this, and this is about hearing colour and seeing sound. So again, remember when people are describing experiences that they've been subjected to, they may be using different linkings of words that you're not used to. So just be aware of that. So when we look at alexithymia, which again is the word I was telling you about that I don't expect you to remember, but what I would like you to remember is that it's a difficulty identifying and describing emotions. So you imagine you're a victim, you're going to a police station, or you're trying to describe your emotions to police when they're gathering evidence, or even in a court of law. If you don't have words to describe those emotions, that's really difficult. And that's where you need support, specialist support, prior to going to court or prior to working with police or whilst you're working with police. And it can result in a lack of emotional awareness for an individual. And that can be really distressing as well. It also impacts on relationships. So for example, when an individual's describing the relationships they had with a perpetrator, again, police and support staff need to be very aware that the person who has difficulty describing and identifying emotions might not be able to engage with that type of conversation very easily. And it impacts on the ability to describe sensory experiences within the body as well, which again, for a victim, is a very serious situation to be in. And we need time to process our feelings and find words in context. Without context, any of this is completely meaningless. So we need tools to help us communicate. And tools that I often use or suggest that people use are around a journal, for example, keeping notes, sticking things in there, doodling, drawing, whatever suits you. You can also use this on a tablet or on a computer according to your preference. Also, having a picture of a gingerbread figure and annotating it so you can describe your feelings, where they are, and put that in a context. Write what context it is, because your feelings will probably change according to context. So in terms of training resources, this is a book that I wrote, beautifully illustrated by Catherine Haywood. It's been broken down into 7 different booklets, and it's probably better if I read this slide in the way that I've written it. So first of all, I'm looking at training in terms of film for the Rape and Sexual Violence project that supported me. So they were really very kind in helping me to bring this film together. It was produced after the court case that I underwent. And it's been broken down into issues that were addressed through the report to court process. And it's now going to be reworked as a tool targeting specific services and linking that with issues that autistic and neurodivergent people encounter. So this book on the left is the book that I authored, and you can get it via Pavilion Publishing and Media. And it's broken down into 7 booklets. So the 7 chapters are the 7 booklets. And I've authored other book chapters and peer-reviewed articles. So The reason I'm saying that is not so that everyone thinks how fantastic I am. It's to just highlight the fact that as a survivor, many of us go on to do work in that area that is really important and really significant because it's from insider expertise. So in terms of training the police, all of the above is relevant to the police, but more recently, I was involved with a Home Office piece of research called Operation Soteria Bluestone. And last week we were training the police. There are over 150 police, and it's going to be training that's rolled out nationally. So again, it's really important. My angle was obviously around neurodivergence. And if you look at language and communication, this again is really, really key to engaging us or engaging with us. So the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I think many people who are autistic or neurodivergent would be able to describe several experiences where that's happened. But language and communication are critical in terms of contextualizing experiences as they focus on injustices, they pay attention to institutionalized practice, and they help to shift blame. And people working to support us need to listen to our terminology described in terms of our identities and in terms of our experiences, because if not, if it's ignored, that can be quite triggering, and it can also shut down communication. So language and communication can also be used to challenge power and address assumptions, so both yours and other people's. They can be used to validate the experience of others through language used. And also they can be used to address diversity and inclusion. And this last point requires taking risks. And that also requires being a little bit humble and having a humble approach to your work. So another thing that police are very often not aware of is echopraxic behavior or masking, which can result in meltdowns or the involuntary release of emotions. So whilst it's a coping mechanism used by neurodivergent people in particular in an attempt to fit in, you imagine going into a police station trying to fit in and being a victim where you're saying things which are not necessarily what you mean, but you're saying them because you think that's what the police want to hear. That can be really, really distressing and is obviously not helpful to the police, but it's not your fault. So it's something that police need to understand so that they can support you with this, and a support worker or an advocate can help you. It's a way of demonstrating that an individual understands and are conforming to situations of regulations. And although I've put that there, sometimes I think it's more about showing that you recognise there's different situations to what you do understand, and you're trying to conform to it, but you're not really sure how to. And these echopraxic behaviour increases in new or changing situations, such as a police station, such as a courtroom. So again, trying to get someone to feel a bit more relaxed so they don't feel they have to fit in, they can be themselves, again, is really important. But the likelihood of that happening is quite difficult to see. It does have a very negative impact on our ability to function in terms of processing information and communication and communicating with others. So again, we need more time. So solutions to this could be no sudden changes and having a very calm environment. So in terms of anxiety triggers and autistic inertia, and again, I think the police particularly need to look at this, they need to explain the process, because if they don't, I certainly had an inability to act or report or respond to certain questions. Why was that? Fear of the unknown or undesirable outcomes linked to increased anxiety. And processing questions may take time. So the neurodivergent brain may shut down due to anxiety or stress or inertia, not because we don't want to communicate. We need time. We don't need lots of questions thrown at us. We don't need sort of unrealistic explanations. And we need our communication needs addressed. So if we don't use a telephone, then we don't need people communicating with us by telephone, for example. And throughout the report's court process, deadlines do change. That's the nature of what that is really. But we need to have reasons. We need to have those reasons explained. And if not, it's very difficult for us to manage, especially if they're sudden and unpredictable. So we need as much notice as possible. And also in terms of making choices, we need there to be time. We need these choices to be broken down. And we need to have a limited number, not a whole heap of things to choose from. So the final project that I'm involved with at the moment, which I'm very, very excited about, and I'm working with two other directors, Willow Holloway and Sara Rocha, and this is Lotus Collaborations. The website isn't published as yet. We're just in the very early stages of setting it up as a CIC, a community interest company. And when we've got the initial papers established, then it will be, the site will be launched. But I'm going to give you a sneaky preview. So it's established from an insider perspective. The focus is going to be on collaborations, training, consultancies, expert review, and activities and events. And this is very much around sexual violence at the moment, and it is for every gender, every sexual orientation. So it's embracing of that. So the sneaky preview for that is, this is what the website looks like. So we've got a little bit about who we are and what we do. I won't necessarily give you loads of time to read all this. You can have a look yourself. So the team of the moment is myself, it's Willow, and then Sara Rocha. And so we give a little bit about us, and then we've got what we're here to do. So we do training. We're going to be doing consultancy work. We're going to be doing expert review, and we're going to be doing different activities and events. Sorry, I'm going to stop doing that. That's really annoying, isn't it? Going up and down. So I'm going to just end there because I'm aware of the time factor, and there's Sara, who's dying to report on the results from their project, and I'm really looking forward to hearing them. And a few references at the end of this, but do look out for the launch of this website, because we're very much looking forward to people engaging with this. It is UK based, but that doesn't stop other people contacting us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzy. I think I can take it from here. See the screen? Well, I'm Sara Rocha. Thank you so much, Suzy. It's amazing to see so much information that we, as neurodivergent, sometimes we do know, but we don't see a lot of this type of information in around sexual violence and topics like this. So thank you so much. I'm Sara Rocha. I managing this project. I represent EUCAP in the Women's Committee of the European Disability Forum. And I'm going to present some preliminary results. Again, this is just some preliminary results because we do need to go through the data and make sure everything is correct. We finished and closed the survey last week, so we had 1 week and we had limited amount of time to actually show you the full results. But hopefully soon you can see everything in a full report. So this is the survey development team. We had a Pookie from EUCAP, me, Joanna Simões, and Svea. We are worked on the development of the survey and the launching. I now process the results, and me and Svea will present you some of the things that we already have. So first of all, trigger warning, because we will be discussing topics can be very distressing about several types of violence. It is important to understand that we will talk about sexual violence and mental health. So if you are not feeling okay at some point, this will be recorded, so you can leave at any point. And then when you're okay to continue, you can go back and rewatch it. In terms of our project, the survey was divided into 4 different topics, which is sociodemographic results. So who is answering, where are they based? Autistic people's experiences of violence. So what type of violence did they experience? And then experiences of reporting violence. So do they report this type of each type of violence? What did they reported? How did it went? And experiences of accessing support services. So did they try to access any support, for example, mental health services or domestic violence shelters, and did it work for them? Did it help them? So in terms of sociodemographic results, diagnostic status, 84% had an official formal autism diagnosis. 14% self-identified as being autistic. A very low percentage said they was not sure, but they were questioning. In terms of, we had one person that selected that they were not autistic, so they were excluded from the survey, which means we had 259 answers to the survey. In terms of self-identity, for people that are not necessarily so used to the autistic community, it's completely okay. In the UK, the waiting list for a diagnosis is sometimes 5 years. So self-identity is very much accepted within this survey. In terms of age, most were between 25 and 39. We did have some over 60, but we are very aware that under 25 and 25 to 39, we have more diagnosis. Older generations just don't have the same access to diagnosis, especially if they're women or non-binary. And this, you can see it from the age of diagnosis. So you can see here that 90% of women that responded were diagnosed after the age of 18, while men were diagnosed or self-identify after 58% of men. Non-cisgender people were also very high on age of diagnosis, which means as women, there is a lot of difficulty getting that diagnosis. So in terms of gender, we did have some lower numbers for male than we expected. We had around 40 answers for men. 4 of them were trans men. We had 168 answers for female, for women. And within this 4 were trans women. We had non-binary and we had other. Within other, what happened is there is several types of identities, including non-binary and also trans man and trans women. So at the moment, what we're going to divide just for this presentation is male, female, and non-cisgender, because then you clean the data and make sure that everyone is in that proper section, and you can report also on differences specifically on trans man, trans women, and non-binary. In non-binary, by the way, it was 59 people that respond, non-cisgender, I'm sorry, 59 people that responded. So it was quite a good number compared to other studies that included non-binary people in their studies around violence. Minorities, the biggest minority is LGBTQIA. It's not surprising. In the autistic community, there's a very high percentage of people that do identify within the community. Gender non-conforming, non-binary or transgender was also very high, 21%. Other, again, we will see specifically which minority groups were, but from what I've seen, it's religious minorities and socio-demographic, socioeconomic minorities. So we also have migrants, people, Black and people of color were very low, and we find this as one of the limitations of the study, because obviously we need to think about intersectionality and how this this actually affect violence in autistic people, and 1% was indigenous. So what was the experiences of violence? As you can see here, they were very high. We divided into these types of violence, which is harassment, hate crime, specifically for disability, psychological or emotional violence, verbal, physical, financial, sexual, bullying or hate crime, neglect, and trafficking. So this was the results. Almost all people suffered some sort of harassment. Women at 95.3%, men at 90%. Hate crime, around half of autistic people suffer some sort of hate crime around disability. Psychological and emotional, it was more than 9 in 10. Verbal, it was even higher, 95%. Physical, women and men. Actually, this is one of the differences where men actually surpassed both physical and financial violence, where men actually have a higher percentage, with 75 for physical and for financial 42.5. In terms of sexual violence, women are in 80.4%, so 8 in every 10 women. Men have 35%. This, we would like to add a note that trans men actually increase this rate for men in general in 26%. So this is, we will make a note on how minorities or gender non-conforming minorities within, for example, men or women, actually, if they have any difference and if they make the difference. In this case, transgender men are much more likely to suffer sexual violence. Non-binary people also have a very, very high rate with 78.4%. So the rate of actually sexual violence on cisgender men is 27.78%, as opposed of 75% in transgender men. Just be aware that it was a low rate. We needed more responses, so that was definitely a limitation. but it just gives us some insight on the differences. Only 2 people in 259 didn't have any type of violence experienced in their life. So finally, bullying and hate crime also extremely high, expected due to the bullying percentage within schools of autistic people. Neglect, it's around 30%. And we did had some cases of trafficking. In terms, yeah, it's not a lot, but we do had some cases, and I think it's important because it's something that we normally don't speak about, especially in autistic people, and we do need more research around what trafficking is happening within autistic people. So I'm going to pass to Svea, and she will continue.
Thank you, Sara. Good afternoon to everybody, and happy International Women's Day at the start. So when we look at each type of violence, you will see the data desegregated by gender as well, because we were very conscientious about keeping the gender perspective in our research as well, because we did include gender-based violence, such as sexual violence and domestic violence, and we knew that losing the gender perspective would significantly lower the quality of our data. So when we look at sexual violence, what's important to note is that the numbers shown here are the percentage out of the total number of people reporting violence, not just those who reported sexual violence. So it's just when you look at the graph right at the start, it's very obvious that women and non-cisgender people experience sexual violence in far greater rates than men, which is very concurrent with the research that shows that women are at a significantly greater risk, both autistic and non-autistic women. When it comes to sexual harassment, we can see that over 60% of women and over 70% of non-cisgender people experience some form of sexual harassment compared to the 20% of men. As I already mentioned, the transgender men increase rates of sexual abuse and rape in the men's group by 40%, which is a significant thing to keep in mind. When it comes to sexual abuse, more than half the women reported experiencing sexual abuse, and more than half non-cisgender people, compared to around 17.5% of men. So you can see these discrepancies between women, non-cisgender people, and men continue in each category. We did not have any data reporting female genital mutilation, but all the other categories were represented in some percentage. So what's important to note is that the rate of attempted rape and rape are 2 times higher in autistic women than they are in non-autistic women, which is a horrifying number when you think about the fact that 1 in 3 women will, in general, experience attempted rape or rape in their lifetime. So these numbers are really, really high then when it comes to autistic women. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. There we are. Thank you. So when it comes to domestic violence, we represented the violence based on perpetrators. So whether the perpetrator was an intimate partner or another family member. You can see here that once again, which makes sense because domestic violence along with sexual violence is the other type of gender-based violence, women were significantly overrepresented as survivors when compared to men and non-cisgender people, with over half the women reporting having experienced domestic violence from an intimate partner and over 70% having experienced it from another family member. For men, these percentages range between 8 and 15, and for non-cisgender people between 15 and 22, 23. We also investigated violence in a medical setting because we know this is a category which is very important when it comes to neurodivergent people, because we do come into contact with the medical system a lot, and research shows that those experiences are in a lot of cases negative experiences. So around a third of men and women reported having been over-medicated at some point. Some smaller percentages report having been hospitalized at a psychiatric facility against their will, or being retained against their will after a voluntary hospitalization. Around 15% of men and 8% of women report having been subjected to harmful treatment for autism. And similar percentages report having been subjected to some type of violence from a disability support service. We can see actually that the type of violence reported most, or the type of experience reported most often, was having had trauma due to interactions with mental health professionals, with around 40% of women, 20% of men, and over half non-cisgender people reporting this type of experience. So this is just a continuation. We had quite a lot of options in this question. Around 20% of all three categories were denied medical access, and around 1/3 of women, around 30% of men, and almost half non-cisgender people were denied diagnosis of a disability or a chronic condition. The numbers you can see here pretty similar for all three groups, ranging between 10 and 18% for having been denied disability aids, such as alternative communication methods or mobility aids. You can see here that some people listed none of the above or other, which we still have to analyze to see what types of violence they experience. When it comes to reporting, what's shown in this graph are the percentages of people who have not reported their experiences of violence. And you can see that the rates of not reporting are very high, which means that only a very small amount of people report their experiences. When it comes to harassment, over half in each group did not report. When it comes to hate crime, similarly, with men here having the greatest percentage of not reporting their experience of violence. You can see basically that in almost every group, the percentage of people who did not report is over 50%, with some exceptions based on gender in certain categories. It's interesting to look at sexual violence as well, where men have the highest percentage of not reporting sexual violence, which is also interesting to look at, because even though this is a gender-based type of violence, where in over 90%, when we look at the wider research, women are the victims and men are the perpetrators. When men are the victims, they're also not believed, and there is this prejudice in society that men cannot be victims of sexual violence, which makes reporting for them significantly hard. So when it comes to reasons for not reporting, around half in each group, half of the people in each group said that they did not report because they were scared. Similarly, almost half the women and over half the non-cisgender people said that they didn't know how or where to report, compared to around a quarter of the men. Over half of the women reported that they did not think they would be believed if they reported violence, which is something that is a persisting theme when it comes to reporting violence, especially when it comes to domestic violence or sexual violence in the wider literature. Around 10%, so between 7 and 9% here in each group say that they were denied access to reporting. And over half, or around half, claimed that they felt ashamed, and this was their obstacle to reporting. Between 12 and around 20% were threatened by the perpetrator. Once again, we can see that there is a gender discrepancy here, with a lot more women listing this as a reason compared to men. Around 15% here, we can see that the obstacle was a lack of alternative communication methods, and around a quarter claimed that there was a different or other reason, which we still have to look into. So out of the cases that were reported, which you can see were not a lot of cases, those that resulted in some sort of conviction. So the percentages are very, very small, ranging from 1 to, at best, 4.5%. I will not go number by number, but you can see that these are very, very low numbers of conviction. So when it comes to support services, what we wanted to see was whether participants of our research found the support services that they accessed useful and to what extent. We can see that the services that they found most useful to some extent or to the full extent that they expected and needed them to be were neurodivergent peer support groups, where 34% reported that they received all the support that they expected and needed. And mental health services, where 47% of the participants found them somewhat useful or useful to an extent. The least useful services were social services or ombudsperson, where 43% reported that what they received from them was not helpful. But we can see a worrying trend that quite a lot of services have significant percentages of people reporting them being not helpful at all, with somewhat slighter amounts reporting them helpful to a certain extent. When it comes to the effects of reporting of services of mental health, what's important to note here is this was a single question, so this data is merged. It would be interesting, of course, to see maybe this data separated, but we had it like this, and we can see that it's quite prevalent that the effects were negative or severely negative, which makes sense considering the previous slide where you saw that for the majority of services, people found that they did not receive or the help they needed, or they only received it to a certain extent. We can also see the gender difference here, where women and non-cisgender people have reported negative or severely negative effects of the reporting process and the services when compared to men. Only very small percentages reported extremely positive effects, and around between 16 and 20% having reported some positive effects of these two services. When it comes to the effect of the experiences of violence and mental health, we were not expecting anything except negative experiences. It's interesting to see that in all three categories, over half the participants report not only having negative, the violence having negative, but severely negative effects on their mental health, with women having the highest percentage and men having the lowest percentage. And now I think I'll pass the mic back to Sara to tell you about the next steps on the project.
Next steps on the project, we're going to perform a full data analysis on the survey and build the final results in a report. The final results will be presented at the 10th International Scientific Conference on Research in Education and Rehabilitation Sciences in Zagreb in May by Svea. And we will develop a state-of-the-art report and fact sheets on the literature review that we've been doing and on the survey results on violence against autistic people. And to be used in advocacy. So the EUCAP members, for example, can translate and use within their organizations to advocate within this subject. And we will also send to organizations that might have an interest in knowing this type of numbers and the needs that arise from violence against autistic people. Another step that we have within this project, we also launch a story, a request for stories from people. We got 15 that were approved now, and we will develop a way to publish them in a nice way that you can also check them, because I feel a lot of the times data, it's good, it's essential, especially disaggregated data as this study did, but it doesn't see the full picture. And I think sometimes personal stories and writing can give a little bit more of understanding how absolutely urgent this topic is to be approached within the autistic community, and more projects to be developed not only in preventing violence and finding ways to support autistic people to not be subject to this type of violence, but also how to develop the reporting processes and services that are supposed to be there to support victims of violence in a way that can make sure that they are inclusive and autistic people can access them without having a bad impact already on their mental health. So we're going to open for questions now. Sorry. I think I'll have to stop sharing so I can see if anyone had questions. Obviously did our job well, so no questions around.
Oh, I have a question or two.
Go ahead.
Can I go ahead? So, I mean, obviously, when you listen, you're sort of quite attentive to things that particularly interest you, aren't you? So, I suppose one of the things that maybe didn't surprise me was the fact that people were saying, and you had quite high figures for this, that they weren't reporting because their communication needs weren't addressed. And I'd be quite interested to see how that's unpacked and how that develops in terms of how your project develops. Is there any scope to do that, or?
We did have some open questions. I'm not sure exactly how much data we have that we can go deeper into that question, but we will definitely go through the open questions also and try to see if there is more information, because around in the end of the violence experiences and the end of the reporting section and the services, we left an open and the question where people could add specifically something that we didn't address, that we didn't think about, or something that they would like to go into more detail about. So we will definitely go into it. And if there is information specifically about communication needs or support through the process in the reporting or in the services, we will definitely put that everything in the report. And Suzy is one of our consultants in the final product, so I'm pretty sure you will have access to everything.
I have one question, something actually that I saw online on social media. Someone commented on this being an interesting selection of languages. Now, I assume that you took all the translations that you could get as volunteer effort, and there was no conscious selections of certain languages or parts of Europe.
Sorry, can you repeat it?
I assume there was no conscious selection of certain languages or parts of Europe, but you got did all the translations that were coming as volunteer, offers.
Exactly. It was a limited funding, obviously, and there was some areas that we had to find ways to just do volunteer work in terms of survey languages. It was organizations that volunteered to support us in translating. Basically, we didn't have budget also for the translations. Also, with the products, it will be based on. We will develop the products. We will support organizations that want to translate them, but we also don't have specific budgets to translate into every language in Europe.
Also, I'd like to ask all of you, Sara, Svea, and Suzy, like on this basis, do you see any obvious needs for further research? Like, what would you recommend for funding bodies to cover next?
I do, and it probably relates to my question, actually. Can I go next, Heta?
Go on.
So I was going to ask you, because I think this is a fantastic piece of research. Small as it is, I think it's really, really critical. And you've got some fantastic data there, really rich data. One thing that I really noticed was there was an awful lot about mental health. And I'm quite keen to see information about specialist services, because they play such a critical part in addressing or having a trauma-informed approach as opposed to a mental health approach, and also in terms of supporting people to go and report as well. And I don't know if any of that came out of your project or could be sort of introduced into future work.
It could, and it definitely will, because one of my projects that I'm trying to set up is precisely how maltreatment happens in autistic people, and how that impacts mental health and accessing mental health services. So what is happening within mental health services that they are clearly not supporting autistic and neurodivergent people that are victims of violence. But this was a limited project. We do have a lot more data in. For example, we have, the perpetrator, the gender, who was it, if it was, for example, workers in institutions, or disability workers or personal assistants, or if it was their parents or partner. So we definitely have more data to show you within the report. This was just a preliminary results that we could clean in time for the webinar. We still have a lot to do in this. In terms of research, there's still a lot. We are starting this. It is very important, and finally we start to see this research within specific experiences, not just the percentages, but what exactly is making difficulty, what is the difficulty within autistic people to report or access services? What are their experiences that they find that why society putting them into this position of vulnerabilization? I don't like the vulnerable status, so I normally say that because in Portuguese, vulnerabilizado, which means it was positioned into a place of vulnerabilization. And exactly all the background, not just in terms of typical violence that we do know, but also types of violence that are very disability specific. In this research, for example, we have two people that were pressured into suffer sterilization, but didn't went through it. But there was one person from Spain. We know that Spain just criminalized sterilization in 2020 that was sterilized. So there are several types of violence that are very specific to disability and autism specifically. And it's very important to understand not just, as Susie said, what type of communication people are struggling with. Why do they find it difficult to communicate with a police officer? How could we improve it? For example, what type of service could you give? What type of support victim services? Will we create a trauma-informed, neurodivergent friendly services would help? How exactly we can improve services to get to support neurodivergent people into finding help and growing and passing over some specific, not just passing over specific trauma that they had, but also to prevent it from happening. And I think that's the next step. But I feel like it is in the point of starting this research, and we still have a lot to do. And I think Svea.
I just wanted to ahead actually your question reminded me, I think, two things that are very important in future research. One would be differences in certain parts of Europe, because Europe is not a monolith, and not only is the access to services very different when we look at it from country to country, the position that institutions take towards autism and that the society takes towards autism varies greatly between, for example, Croatia and the UK. when Sara said in the beginning that, you know, we purposefully included self-identifying autistic people in this survey. I know that self-identifying as an autistic person in the UK is something that's become more common. In Croatia, we're just starting in Croatia. We're basically just fighting to be recognized. Even those of us who have official diagnosis, if you're an adult autistic person who's not a boy with intellectual disabilities, our status as autistic people is very often denied, and it's a struggle that I think certain countries have overcome to a certain extent, and we're just beginning. And I think all of these ableist factors play into both the experiences of trauma and violence and how the services are formed, because talking about neurodivergent friendly services here sounds like science fiction to me, for example, because we have a lot of issues that we have to overcome to come to that point. So I think breaking it down and looking at the cultural and national context will be very interesting, because it will give us a much more varied set of data. And I think the other thing which actually comes up in certain research that I've read when doing the literature review, and I think would be interesting to include, is when experiences of violence, especially bullying, for example, are researched within the autistic population, how those questionnaires are constructed and what is considered bullying varies a lot, because when you look at when you have open-ended questions, when you look at what autistic people report as experiences of bullying might not actually fit what the neurotypical researchers, for example, think of as bullying, that all the questionnaires that are used that have been standardized to research this topic list as bullying, which I think is why maybe a lot of the times while we do experience certain types of violence, they don't come up in research because they're not recognized by the research tools that are used to research this topic. So just from a research point of view, I think this is also an interesting area to explore in the future.
I would add just to Svea how as countries also intersectionality. For example, one of the limitations on our study was a very low number of Black and people of color, but how racism actually affects, for example, the medical violence, because we do know that in UK, for example, Black people are 11 times more likely to get a compulsory order through the inpatient unit than white people. So how does this affect? And also, this type of intersectionality is very important in the future to address and to understand how different minorities within the autism community can be severely impacted. Sudy?
Yeah, and I think the point that you raise and you have earlier as well about intersectionality is really critical, because the second you go into a police station, assuming you're going to them and they're not coming to you, the first time you meet the police officer, you're presenting an intersectional identity. Now, they're usually the ones who assume what identity you're presenting, and you're not actually in a fit state to state what identity that is, because you're traumatized, you're shocked, you're going through all the things that you're going through. And I think there needs to be some way definitely to communicate that from the start off, because it impacts very much on language. It also impacts very much on communication. It impacts on the way that you engage with the police and that they engage with you. And in terms of the sort of power dynamics as well, that sort of moving forwards, you want to give as much control as possible to the victim as you can, because essentially, as soon as you've been exposed to either sexual violence or gender-based violence, you've had control taken away from you. So from the outset, it should be about giving control back to the victim.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm not sure if there's any question left, but Hetta, I think if not, we can close today. And I just want to say thank you so much to the European Women's Lobby, to the whole team that developed the survey and now that is helping with the literature reviews and consulting to actually do the reports, and to EUCAP for believing in this project. And I hope you found it interesting, even though it's very shocking, even for people that are doing already the surveys. I know that these numbers will show up. But if you have any question, you can always send us an email, see more about the project on EUCAP's website. And yeah, hope you found it interesting. Thank you.